Hey everybody, welcome to Executive Job Search Secrets Podcast. I'm Norbert Joost. This is Chris Kirkpatrick.
Hey everybody.
Today we are going to talk to you about the art of the interview. Okay, so good stuff.
Fun stuff.
We got good stuff today. This is very, very, I don't want to say riveting information, but this is extremely important, extremely
I think it's vital. I think
Vital.
it's
There you go. That's a
something. It's
good word.
something everybody. I think it's one of the most misunderstood elements of your job search because
Correct.
I think Norbert's probably going to touch on this as he gets started here. But I think it's one of those things that most people think they're better at interviewing than they really are. And Norbert's going to start off. I think by talking about some things that. You need to make sure you don't fall into,
Right.
and some tips and tricks and ways to kind of avoid getting trapped and blowing opportunity because
Absolutely.
you get one swing at this thing. And
Yeah, and to your point, I think it's the most underappreciated thing in an interview process.
Yeah.
That people have a tendency to think that their resume is what's selling them, and that their past, their career accomplishments, and all that stuff is going to speak for themselves. But the reality of it is that's not true. And so, the first point that I like to make with the interview process is it takes practice. I don't care how good you are. I don't care if you are the number one salesperson in your company and you have been President's Club consecutively for 10 years. You are not, you say it all the time. Just because you're good at what you do doesn't make you good at interviewing to get a job doing what you do.
Amen.
So when I say practice, I'm talking about you want to go through and you want to internalize your resume. You want to internalize the information. And just because you have lived it, a lot of people make the mistake of thinking that I'm going to go for an interview. I already know this. I lived it. But then all of a sudden you get asked a question on how your background is relevant to this position that's open, and you have a difficult time verbalizing it. And so that's where I talk about it means take your time and practice over and over and over again, and get it so it's fluent. Get it so that you can speak to it. And just because it's on paper, again, you need to be able to convey it to the interviewer in a way that they can understand it and appreciate what has actually gotten you those awards, achievements, success, etc.
1,000%. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is you have to realize nobody hires an interview, right? Like your interview, your resume. Did I say nobody hires an interview? Everybody hires an interview. Nobody hires a resume. And one of the biggest things, mistakes I think that job-seeking individuals make is they think that their resume is going to be enough to differentiate themselves. Like the reality is, your resume is what will get you in the door. Like don't let me sound like I'm saying resumes are not important, because they absolutely are.
Absolutely. It's why we designate an entire section of our course to the importance of personal branding and resumes.
1,000%. And it's just a tool, right? It's just a tool to get in the door. It's like anything else. Trust me, a hammer is a tool, a saw is a tool, a drill is a tool. You don't want me using those tools. I'm not good with them. Like I have contractors and all those people that do that stuff. A resume is a tool. You need to make sure that you utilize the tool appropriately. And your ability to get a job is going to be dependent on your ability to knock it out of the park in the interview. I can't tell you how many people I've spoken with that say, man, I have gotten to the final stages of the interview process so many times, yet I always come in second, third, fourth place, whatever it is. And when I hear that, I instantaneously know this person probably needs no help with their resume, and they need all the help in the world with the coaching behind how to interview, how to prepare for the interview, how to navigate the interview, how to follow up from the interview, like that whole process, because that's obviously where the break in their process is, and the break in their success is, because they're getting the interviews and that their resume is doing its job, right?
Right.
But if that person is saying, hey, listen, I can't even get an interview. Now we probably got to look at the resume, right?
Right.
Like, so it just is what it is. So I know you have some kind of, I don't know, tips,
Truisms.
truisms that go along with making sure that you have a more effective interview.
Right. So the first thing I start with is, a lot of people don't analyze the questions that are being asked of them
Yeah.
by an interview. They just kind of assume that those questions are being asked randomly,
Yeah.
haphazardly, whatever. You need to think about every question that's being asked of you is being asked by design. This is a manager has a reason for every question that they ask. And I think a lot of people have a tendency to answer questions off the cuff without giving it a great deal of thought. And, the other thing I would tell you is people have a tendency to tell the truth, which I would always encourage
Sure.
that you tell the truth. But there's a difference. I tell candidates, all the time, there's a difference between telling the truth and going to confession.
For sure.
And what I mean by that is, and I'll give you an example. I had a candidate one time, and they was in a position, and this particular manager wanted to know if somebody is calling on this particular hospital in Burlington.
Okay.
And so I called up, I talked to this candidate, I said, "Are you currently calling on Burlington?" And they said, "I am." And I said, "Are you calling on this particular cardiologist?" And they said, "I do." And then I said, "Fantastic." And then they followed it up by saying, "But we don't have a contract at this account, and so I don't go there that often. We haven't gotten that much business from that account." That's
Yeah.
that's the difference between telling the truth and going to confession.
Right.
And I know you actually had a term for that in your previous career.
Yeah, I mean, we call it benign embellishment, right? Because I'm a big believer, you have to be able to, everything on your resume has to be truthful, it has to be authentic, it has to be, you have to be able to back it up. Because if it goes on your resume, there's a really high likelihood, if it's significant especially, that you're gonna have to explain it on some level, in some way, at some point in time. And so we call it benign embellishment simply because it's exactly what Norbert just said for an example. You can say that, yes, I call on that person. That was it a cardiologist? Is that what you said?
It was, correct.
Cardiologist probably would know who that salesperson is because
Correct.
they've called on. There would be name recognition. There is. I don't want to say a relationship, but there's a professional awareness, right, of each other.
Sure.
And so that is beneficial always. And so to be able to say, yes, I have that, I have called on that, that is advantageous. To continue down that, I would consider benign embellishment, because now you're just not letting all the information out there because they're not asking. Now,
Right.
if they ask you straight up, what are the results? That's where it gets a little hairy, but don't proactively give them ammo against you.
Right.
It just makes no sense.
Well, and then there's the flip side of benign embellishment, where sometimes you might have to give some benign embellishment to actually get in the door
Yep.
or to advance the interview process. And here's an example of that. You might have a bag full of 10 products, and you may not sell this one particular product all that much. It might be 2% of your business, let's
Yeah.
say. And they ask you, "Hey, do you call on vascular surgeons, for example?" And you're like, "Well, I have this one product in my bag that's really 2% of my bag."
But
Well,
I do.
That's where benign embellishment, that's where you may need to embellish. You're not lying,
Yeah.
you're telling the truth.
Yeah.
It is in my bag. I do sell it to vascular surgeons,
It's just not your main focus.
but you don't need to go to confession and say, "Hey, it's only 2% of my business."
For sure. Yep. No, I agree 100%. It's just a matter of, that's where it just comes down to really understanding what is the role that you're interviewing for, understanding what their needs are, and how do you fill those needs with your relationships, with your skill sets, with your expertises, with your industry and product knowledge and all these different things, right? So that's focus on the positives. Anything that is going to be potentially interpreted as a negative to you landing the job, I would never volunteer that information proactively.
Absolutely. And so, the one thing you want to start every interview with is you need to understand the goal of any one particular step in the process is to get to the next step.
Yep.
Period. No more. You're not going into a first interview or a phone screen to get the job.
Yep.
You're going into a phone screen to get to the face-to-face. You're going from the first face-to-face to get to the second, which might be that person's manager.
Yep.
And then you're going from that manager to the final interview. So you need to keep that in mind because people have a tendency to over talk themselves, or where you've got the next step in the process, they've agreed to move you on in the process, but you continue to feel the need to talk, feel the need to continue to sell yourself, and sometimes it can work against you where you actually sell yourself completely out of the process.
Don't oversell, and there's that old saying, don't keep selling beyond the sale, right? Like
Right.
once, like you have to understand, but that all comes from awareness, right? And so I think authenticity is really important, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And like, I don't know if this is on your list, I think it is, but I don't want to jump ahead, but it's just, I'm thinking about it right now. And you need to make sure that everything you do is 1,000% authentic in this interview. And the only way you are able to be in that space is if you're prepared. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I'm a big believer that the interview is won during preparation. I write about it in my book a lot. I call it the Executive Preparation for Interview Circle, right? And so it's actually here on page 204 of the book. And so it starts off like, and I'm not going to go into it. I have other videos, so I'll tell you what, I'm not going to go into it. You can watch some of our other videos on it. But at the end of the day, the whole purpose to it is to be fully present and authentic with a company. You have to go in there, and this is another phrase that I'm a big believer in, is that the person who's asking the questions is the one who's in control of the interview, right? And so or in control of any conversation for that
Correct.
matter. So if you are in an interview, the biggest mistake I believe that people make is they just kind of sit back and they just try to answer questions, right? If you are trying to land a significant position with any company, or if you're looking to differentiate yourself from anybody, you need to make sure you go in with a consultative hat on and you're asking critically thought out questions.
Right.
The only way to do that is to prepare effectively. That's why I say the interview is one in preparation, because if you can prepare effectively and you understand the face of the company, the inner workings of the company, the direction of the company, the challenges, the problems, are they having a growth issue? Are they needing to turn things around? Are they needing to cut costs? Are they need to become more efficient? Are they looking to expand into other regions and grow territories? And like what is the need and what is your skill set and how can you help bridge that and fill the hole that they have, right? And the only way you can do that is by asking great questions. The only way you can ask great questions is if you prepare properly. And that's why we created the whole Executive Preparation for Interview Circle. And I have a whole chapter in the book completely dedicated to understanding how to prepare for the interview. So that's, I think, important.
On your point about preparation and being authentic, there's always going to be situations where you're unprepared for, right?
Yeah, amen.
And so part of the interview process is being quick on your feet and being able to think quickly, come up with an answer to something that you may not be prepared for. And you've created an entire system, an acronym called SOAR, in that situation.
Yeah, no,
because it happens.
Yeah, and I'm a huge believer and actually passionate about this in every way. Yeah, we want to be prepared for everything, but at the end of the day, to remain authentic and to come off as authentic, because let's face it, we've all met that person who has the best intentions and they're kind of authentic, but they come off as awkward because they're not prepared. And I think you need to make sure you don't fall into that trap as well. So what we say is you follow the SOAR methodology, which is so the SOAR is an acronym for situations, the situation, obstacles or opportunities, action, and then result. So like anytime anybody asks you a question in an interview, especially a behavioral question or an action related question, you can literally go through that framework and say, well, you know what, here was the situation. Even if you don't have something prepared, take 5 to 10 seconds and think about it, even though it's going to feel like the longest 5 to 10 seconds of your life. Think about it for a second, you know what I mean? And then say, okay, here was the situation. Here was the obstacle or opportunity that we faced, depending on the nature of the question. here's the action that we took, and here's the result that came out of it. And so that relates to what we call and equates to what we call executive speak, because they don't want to know your whole story. They don't want to know your life. They want to know, how did that situation impact you, and why is it meaningful to them in the circumstance, how it would apply to the job, and how you would act as a leader or a salesperson or in the role that you're going to be filling, right? And so be very concise, be to the point, have what we call executive speak, and just be on target, be relevant to the question, just stay focused. Because when you start bouncing all over the place with those questions, and having a full chapter dissertation on that one question, it eats into your interview time, and it maybe spends too much time focusing on areas that really aren't that important in the grand scheme of things. So when you waste that time, it makes you look not as prepared, not as professional, and also if from a leadership perspective, having that framework just makes you look just a step above everybody else.
Right. And so that kind of ties in multiple things that we've just covered.
100%.
Number one, practice.
Yeah.
But number two, on the be authentic and be prepared, one of the things that I always recommended to any candidate is there's going to be situational questions that you're asked. So come up with you're always going to be asked, tell me about a time where. And so come up with an account. And so this comes back to the embellishment part, the telling the truth without going to confession.
Yeah.
So this is true. You really do have an account, but come up with that account. So when you're asked that question that you're not prepared for, that you can say, you know what, there was this one account that was always a problem for me. Or flip it around. There was this one account that was always one of my best customers, but this situation happened. So that comes back to practice.
Yeah.
That comes back to maybe a little bit of embellishment, telling the truth without going to confession, but also not lying, right? And then the other thing is then with those situations, you can stay with that SOAR. And the other last thing I would say on that is, you talked about maybe going on too long, being concise. Typically, there's a science to this. If you're embellishing too long and going on too long, typically you're probably lying, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
so they will tell if you are not concise to the point with your answer and confident with your answer.
Yep.
They're probably going to be suspicious of the response.
Absolutely. I mean, it is what it is. You need to be real, and if you're not, it comes off very, very clearly. You're either going to be questioned as to your genuineness behind it, if you're telling the truth, if you're being a little bit deceptive, and remember, when I say benign embellishment, I'm not talking about lie. I want to be really clear with that. We're not talking about lying.
Absolutely.
We're talking about omission. That's it.
Correct.
Just omit the things that aren't relevant. Give the information that makes you look like a rock star, and just omit the stuff that isn't in alignment with the message you're trying to communicate. If they ask you to elaborate and you have to let that stuff come out, well then so be it. You have to. Because I'm never going to tell anybody to lie, because that's the most certain way to shoot yourself in the foot and lose opportunity. But once again, just don't provide it.
Well, and that goes, it ties into the other parts of the interview that we talk about is, you want to build rapport. And there are multiple ways of building rapport, and it comes back to preparation and practice. You want to research who you're interviewing with, what their background is, so that you can build rapport. And that comes back to being authentic. If this person has this in their background, you don't want to lie and say, oh my gosh, I love football. Really? Who's your favorite team? The Chicago Blackhawks. That's not a football team, right? So you want to be authentic. You want to prepare and do your background, but you also want to be transparent with these people. You want to not get caught with your pants down.
Well, so what I would say to that, and this is kind of how I always explain it to people, and this has nothing to do with the technicals of anything. It just goes to kind of rehashing the authenticity element of it. But remember this, people are not hiring a resume. That's the whole purpose of this process, right? There is a huge element to this, that we hire people that we know, like, and trust. So this interview process, a big part of this, one of the first things, whether they're intentionally thinking this or not, a lot of times they're thinking, okay, this person has to report to me, or I have to work with this person every single day. Is this a person that I can see myself enjoying working with on a day in, day out basis?
Absolutely.
First and foremost. So like, I'm not saying go in there and slap backs and like, be Johnny Blowhard, but I am saying, you want to make sure that you understand they don't John Maxwell says it. I write it in my book multiple places, I think, is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Once they find out how much you care, you better know something, right? And so with that said, people don't care how much you know and how good you are at your job until they like you, until they know they can like you.
Right.
Once they know they like you, then they go, wow, I hope this guy is as good as we hope he is, right? That's where you want to get the interview, because once they're there, once they go, wow, I like this guy or I like this woman, like now it becomes a situation like they're pulling for you.
Right.
They're hoping you're as good as your resume says. Like they want to be your advocate. And that is, I think, probably the area that most people just can't wrap their head around when it comes to an interview.
And I have a phenomenal example of that. One
Awesome.
of my old managers used to ask the question, what do you like to do in your free time? And people just thought, oh, this is a building rapport. Like, he wants to yuck it up with me. And so, they would just answer these unprepared, unthought out responses. And so the reality of it is, it was a well thought out question because I was in spine sales. And so there was a lot of free time. You only have a handful of doctors that you call on. So if you can't get in front of that doctor, if you're not in surgery with that doctor, I had a lot of free time with my manager. So when he would ask the question, what do you like to do in your free time? He wasn't just looking to yuck it up with me and build rapport. He wanted to know, to your point, do I like this person? Does this person have similar interests to me? He was a fisherman. He loved to hunt. So if we have downtime, if a doctor surgery gets over or whatever, and at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he wants to know, can we go out and maybe go pheasant hunting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and spend time? And am I going to enjoy the time with this person? And
Amen.
A phenomenal, funny example of that was he asked a person, what do you like to do in your free time? And this person was, let's just say, not fully put together. And they said their response was, I like to watch NBA basketball. So he said in his brain, he visualized he and this candidate sitting on the couch, like eating popcorn together. They're in their scrubby sweats or something.
Nice.
And he was like, and didn't move forward with that candidate.
Sure.
So that goes back to practice, preparation, that every question is asked of you is by design.
Yeah.
You may not think it's by design, but it's by design.
If a question is asked of you in the interview, it matters to the person who asked the question. It's your job to figure out why they asked it and make sure you answer it in a relevant way. Not relevant to you. It's your job to be a detective and figure out the relevancy to them and try to make it, as congruent of an answer as possible.
Right.
And the only way to do that is to follow the EPIC system and to prepare properly. And like
use
that's
the SOAR method.
And use the SOAR method and just like you plug those two things together. And I'm going to tell you right now, that's one of the reasons that anytime somebody calls me and they're like, I have an interview, I need to prepare. And I go, okay, we can help you prepare. That's no problem. When's the interview? Tomorrow. You're screwed. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I always tell people.
That's not the definition of preparation.
Yeah, exactly. You are not like, if somebody calls you to say, hey, I would love you to come in for an interview. We're so excited to interview with you as well, blah, 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 blah. I want you to come in tomorrow or 2 days from now. It is really, really hard for a lot of people to say, to not accept that interview and just jump up and down because it's the opportunity. Chances are if you've been seeking and not getting a lot of activity, getting a lot of interviews, you're just desperate. And the one thing you can't sell is desperation. And so I really want to encourage you to realize, like, as soon as they ask you to come in, you need to take a step back and say, I would love to come in. I'm excited to come in. But because I'm so excited about the opportunity, because I am really passionate about this, I want to make sure I'm prepared so I can bring the amount of value that I would like to bring to the interview as well. And so in order for me to do my job effectively and to prepare for this, to make sure that I'm the right fit for you and all this, like whatever, I need to spend some time to prepare. So how about, and then propose a time, 3, 4, 5 days out, but never earlier than 3 days. And if it's 3 days, you better be dedicated to just hammering out the preparation and just like really cramming in those 3 days and do nothing but that.
One last topic that I want to cover
Yeah.
in the preparation for the interview and the art of the interview is addressing the elephant in the room. And what I mean by that is you may have a gap on your resume. You maybe were fired. You maybe, if you're at a sales position, let's say, for example, because that's my background, let's say you were at 90% of quota 2 years in a row and you don't bring that up in the interview. That's the elephant in the room.
Sure.
And what I mean by that is you might come out of that interview and you might feel like, "Phew, I dodged a bullet. We didn't address that gap in my resume. Phew,
They're
we
thinking
didn't address that
Yeah.
80% to quota performance.
Yeah.
We didn't address the fact that I was fired. We didn't address the fact that I quit." Trust me, you're not getting off. Remember how Chris talked about in the beginning about all those people that are always the bridesmaid, never the bride? They get to the final interview multiple times, but they come in second, third, fourth place. There's potentially multiple things that could be. It could be, you know, that your answers weren't good enough, your competition was better than you. Those things are out of your control.
Yep.
Or actually the answer thing isn't, but if your
Sure.
competition beats you, you're beat,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
It is what it is.
Yep.
But you control what you can control. And one of those things is addressing those gaps, those elephants in the room, because you are being judged on it whether you think it or not. So you are better off being transparent, being authentic, and addressing it up front and talking about it. And I guarantee you, they might not like your answer, but they'll appreciate your honesty. And at least if you don't move forward in the process, you'll have an understanding of why.
Well, and you're going to increase the chances that you do get a yes, because obviously going into an interview, there's no guarantee you're going to get a yes and get the job regardless, right? So by going down and trying to avoid these questions, as he said, you're not gonna just skate by and not have to answer these tough questions if you expect to get the job, because at some point in time you're going to have to address those things, right? Because any company that's doing their due diligence is going to address that at some point in time. Even if it's not the first interview, they're going to come back to you. If you're fortunate enough to get through, even after not addressing it, it's going to come up in the second one.
Right.
So just get it out of the way. Just do it, you know? And here's what I would say to that. And this, I love these one-liners. And this is maybe one of my favorite ones, is that a confused mind always says no. And your job as the person being interviewed is to use the art of storytelling, story selling, right? And being able to take this fact, this line item on your resume that maybe is confusing to them, right? And that maybe goes, wow, you know what, Norbert, he was really awesome and we really liked him. But it's that
But
thing
why
right
was
there
he
on that resume,
unemployed
that
for
doesn't
6 months or
that
12
doesn't make
months?
sense. And why wasn't that brought up? And like now, as much as they like Norbert, they're confused. And a confused mind always says no. And now if you're the only person interviewing, which is hardly ever the case, you know, like,
Not for good jobs.
right,
anyway.
not for a good job, exactly. Like, then obviously you can get fortunate or get lucky and get a second chance, and maybe they'll follow up with you proactively. But most of the time, that's not going to be the case. And you're going to be competing against potentially dozens of other people in the first round stage. And if that's the case, I'm sorry, but you're just going to get slid over into the no column. And there's all these other people that are going to take the next step.
Right. So I would get calls all the time from candidates who thought the interview went well. They thought they were moving along in the process, thought they were going to get the job, and didn't end up getting it, and never got an explanation as to why that didn't happen. So we're here to help you make those little tweaks and work out the kinks so that instead of helping you, make it to the final stage of the interview process, actually help you get the job.
Get the offer. Yep. And that's everything. So anyway, this was a pretty elaborate, in-depth video about all of this stuff. Now, of course, it goes much, much deeper, but on a surface level, the purpose of this was we wanted to provide kind of a surface level view of the elements that I think people just kind of have blind spots in when it comes to the job interview process, how to prepare, how to go through it, like,
Right.
and just a lot of the areas that we just get feedback from candidates who think they're doing better in areas than they truly are, or they think they're more
And
gifted
feel
or
that
talented.
frustration because they don't understand why.
Exactly. And so hopefully this maybe illuminates some areas for you. If you have any questions about anything, you can always email support@careernextagency.com. Norbert or myself will respond to you. And we'd be happy to get on the phone with you to have a consultation to figure out what's going on with your search. You know, like some people need resume help, some people need coaching, some people need help with LinkedIn, some people, you know, just want a second set of eyes, you know, with somebody who's an expert who they can trust, because like we said earlier, just because you're amazing at doing what you do doesn't make you amazing at finding a job at what you do. And quite frankly, you shouldn't be amazing at finding a job at what you do. If you are, it means you're doing it too often. And we need to have a conversation about that. So anyway, also, this is the playbook for you to be able to find your job. I am 1,000% believer this is the best, most well-kept secret, even though, you know, it's not a secret, but like, if you don't know about it, you need to know about it. It will be the playbook for everything you need to do to be able to find your job faster, period. I always tell people, it will help you find your job up to 400% faster if you just follow the advice in that book. I promise you, get the book, you will love it. It will make a huge impact in everything you're doing day in, day out during your job search. And that's that. So feel free, go to careernextagency.com if you have any questions about anything. But until next time, go out there, have a blessed, inspirational day. I hope you go out and crush it, and we'll talk to you on the next video.
Take care.